Hot Topics. I'm your host, Jodi Schafer, and as always, we aim to make this the most informative 5 minutes of your month. We are recording this on Friday, November 6th, and we purposely held off as long as possible to shoot this footage in the hopes that we would have some election results and that we could talk about that. But unfortunately, the count continues. Fortunately, the count continues. Unfortunately, it's taking this much time, and we're all sort of on the edge of our seat while we wait and wonder what the future holds. And that just really brought up this idea of control and the feeling that I think so many of you can identify with. I know I'm feeling this personally, a lack of control. We have an election that's going to be, I'm sure, hotly contested. We've got COVID numbers that are spiking with no end in sight. We're on the precipice of flu season. We have new guidance coming out from MDHHS that limits the size of social gatherings that are indoor, especially in residential settings. And while that's understandable, it calls into question what the holidays are going to be like this year. And if there was ever a year that we all needed family and connection and just that ability to kind of come together, it's this year. And it's looking like that's going to be limited, just like so many things have been limited. So just this general feeling of lack of control. And as you probably noticed, I thought, like, I'm experiencing it personally. I've got this Band-Aid on my forehead. I was hopeful that this would be healed up by now. I went in to have a mole removed that was at the center of my forehead. It always bothered me. And wasn't really thinking about the implications of how that affects my shooting schedule for videos. But, you know, here I am with a Band-Aid, and what else can you control, right? We're just going to roll with it. That's sort of my theme for all of 2020. Just go with it. And I'm sure you can all feel the same way. So let me talk about what we can control. In the midst of all of this chaos and uncertainty, there are a few things that I think will help you recenter and refocus. The election and the future of our country, that's out of our hands at this point. But when we shift to COVID and what's happening with the COVID numbers, I think there's a reality and an opportunity here for us to recommit within our places of business to the safety protocols and the disinfection, procedures that we had written about and were so diligent with when we first came back to the workplace. And yet we all suffer from COVID fatigue, and we get a little lax in our hand washing, either how well we do it or the frequency. We get a little lax in how close we're standing to one another. And we've certainly gotten lax with the mask wearing. When we wear it, how we wear it, right? And we're just kind of all sick of wearing the damn masks, right? But we understand the importance of them. So given the spike that we're seeing in cases and the fact that more and more things are moving indoors because of weather, I think it's important as employers that you pull out your COVID preparedness and response plans. Remember those documents you had to create months ago? Pull those out, take a look at them, and recommit as an organization to all of those safety protocols. And on the topic of preparedness and response plans, there are some updates that you're going to need to make to yours if you haven't touched them in a few months. The first has to do with some definitions. So the CDC has recently changed the definition of close contact, and that's important when you're trying to figure out who might have been exposed and who may need to quarantine within your place of work. So understanding that close contact is no longer for 15 continuous minutes. So within 6 feet for 15 or more minutes without proper PPE, that used to be the definition. And now that 15 minutes is no longer a continuous 15 minutes, it's a cumulative 15 minutes over the course of 24 hours, which is a lot more difficult to track as an employer. But I think it just reinforces the importance of social distancing, to just not even get within 6 feet if you can at all help it, because the tracking of that time is basically impossible. And the importance of PPE, I've gotten a lot of calls from clients who had an employee get exposed, usually through some sort of social setting, bring it into the workplace, realize then that they've been exposed or start to have symptoms, and then the employer starts to do that tracing internally, and lo and behold, employees in the break room were without masks or were at a table that was not 6 feet long, or there were more of them in the room than what the square footage would allow for. Again, right, COVID fatigue, but it's happening. So it's just so important that we recommit to those basic safety rules. It's important that we look at our plans and make sure that they're up to date. One other change that's going to be important for your plan while I'm on this subject, MIOSHA has, through their emergency rules, created another requirement for employers. Employers now have to have a policy, a written policy that prohibits in-person work for tasks that could be feasibly performed remotely. And that is regardless of industry. So if you're in the manufacturing industry and most of your team has to come on site because that's where the equipment is, you still have to have this policy in place. And again, it's prohibiting in-person work to the extent possible, right? If tasks can be feasibly performed remotely, then they must be performed remotely. Now, one bright spot there is that MIOSHA is not going to question the employer's judgment around things that could be feasibly done remotely versus needed to be done in the workplace. So employers still have the ability for discretion on that, but what you don't have the ability for is to not be without a policy. You have to have this in writing, and it has to be part of your COVID preparedness and response plan. One final thing that I think is within our control, and you've heard this a lot in your own communities and from health advisors, the importance of the flu shot. The flu shot's always been highly recommended for various industries, especially if you are in the healthcare industry. But given the spike in COVID cases, it's even more important this year for all of us to seriously consider getting a flu shot. And as an employer, you can mandate that your team get flu shots. You have to allow for reasonable exceptions, one of which could be if you've got somebody with a health condition or a compromised immune system and the doctor says they shouldn't get the shot, then that's reasonable and you can exempt them from this policy. Or if somebody has a religious exemption, then you could also exempt them from this. But generally speaking, employers, private employers can require that their staff get flu shots, and you can get them for free at various locations. So this, the cost doesn't even have to be an issue. So kind of be thinking through that. And then finally, again, reinforce with your team the importance of prudent behavior off the clock. You can't mandate what staff do in their free time, but I think just drawing attention to the fact that we've got to be really diligent and careful right now, and that off the clock behavior, especially in the age of COVID, absolutely has an impact for the business. Those two things aren't separate anymore. And so starting those discussions now and thinking through holidays is going to be, I think, a proactive way for all of us to do what we can to minimize spread within our workplace. So with that, I'll leave you. We'll be back in December. We can talk about creative ways to still celebrate the holidays with our team, but to do so in a responsible manner. And between now and then, you and I will both be on the edge of our seats to what happens with our election results. So pray for our leaders, and I'll keep all of you in my thoughts and prayers too, but we'll continue to get through this together.